CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, coming to you, yes, you guessed it, from the CHEK News World Headquarters. Where else would we be? Well, sometimes we do the show from my living room, but that's not the point. The point is that we are here now to break down all the latest in BC politics. This week, we are going to look back at the biggest stories in 2023, and to do that, we bring in the pod squad. You know and love them. Jillian Oliver, Jeff Ferrier, and Allie Blades have been here all year. Thank you for watching the year progress, and what a busy year it was. We started with a new premier, basically just weeks into the job, turning up the speed of government to 11. Massive reforms, BC Liberal Party that started the year and ended the year as BC United, the Conservatives, the Greens, just so much. Our political cup runneth over with topics. But Jillian, we will start with you. What do you think the biggest sort of trend or story was in BC politics in 2023?
I think that a lot of the political news this year was dominated by housing. This was the biggest focus of the provincial government. We had a new premier coming in at the end of last year. This was his core focus, and the government's legislative agenda was just absolutely dominated by significant changes to how housing is planned, built, and used province-wide. So we saw, a virtual ban on short-term rentals in big cities, expansion of the speculation tax, widespread changes to zoning throughout the province. That is going to come into play next year, and I think will continue to be one of the biggest stories. Lots of remaining questions coming out of these changes as they come into effect in the new year. How much is this going to affect prices? Are they going to go up, or how quickly are people going to see movement on more supply? And also probably some looming maybe fights, maybe more discussions with local governments on how all of the infrastructure that's going to be required to accommodate these new communities as they get built is paid for.
Yeah, we've almost every week talked about housing this year, and I encourage everyone to go back and listen to all 52 episodes for the details of each policy announcement. But Allie, when I'm talking to people, mostly what I hear from them is, well, at least David Eby's trying something. At least he looks like he's doing some good things here. That's the kind of takeaway from 10,000 feet, the perception that, has cut through the fog, that he's taking a run at the NIMBYs or the Airbnbers or the investors. Worth a try. That's a pretty good reaction in politics.
Oh, absolutely. I won't dispute that the NDP and the government have made headlines this year with their housing approach, because there were a lot of things to fix. Therefore, they threw a lot of things together, but they threw it together quite quickly. And so I think next year the headlines will be how it may actually be falling apart. In that the NDP have been very strategic as to not to include any sort of timelines for things. So therefore, do we even think that any of these housings will potentially be built? They've been behind in the past based on what they promised. So it might be the headlines for the wrong reasons in 2024.
Yeah, that's interesting. Jeff, what do you think of housing in the past year?
Well, it's hard to argue that anything but housing is the top political story of the year in British Columbia. I think for Premier Eby, the win and the problem is the same. That the takeaway for most folks in British Columbia on BC politics for this year is, two words: Eby and housing. It's a win because he dominated the conversation. He flooded the landscape with action, and we've talked about them all. Did it in a way that the opposition parties did not do at all. Did not see anything from Kevin Falcon, did not see anything from John Rustad. Saw some interesting critique from the Greens, but not a whole lot in the way of policy innovation. So if we're talking about things breaking down next year, I'm not convinced they will. But if they do, it's because he put something forward to break down in the absence of anything being brought forward by the opposition. But the problem is that, there's going to be an election in October. And a lot of the moves that Eby's taken are going to take a long horizon to manifest, to make a difference. And so, prices may moderate, but they'll still remain high. Supply will come on, but it'll just be starting and it won't be making a difference. So he's got to manage that. It'll be interesting to see if what those folks are telling you, that at least he's doing something, and I like the action, if that sentiment holds to the election, or if it's replaced with he's trying things and it's not working.
Yeah, he has a few things in his favor, though, in the sense that it's really the interest rates that are, federally done that are kind of choking the housing market prices right now, keeping things from exploding. And so he might benefit from that next year. And then New Democrats built in like 2 implementation echoes in this thing. So they're going to re-announce short-term rentals in March to big fanfare, and re-announce the single-family units lots being multiplexes in June. So they get to kind of try to redouble all the good publicity they got this year. So we'll be talking more about it in the coming year. Jeff, stay with you. What was your topic of 2023? What jumped out at you?
So housing's number one. So I decided to go off the board a little bit, though, so we didn't just want to spend the whole show talking about housing. And my top story of 2023 is wildfire, because of what the wildfires were, what they tell us about where we are, and about where we need to go as a province. So, remember this summer, there was 2.84 million hectares of forests and lands burned. That's a big number. No one understands that. But for folks in Victoria who are watching on CHEK, take the BC legislature grounds, right, and burn that 470,000 times over. That's how much forest burned this summer. It's the most ever, double the previous record, 10 times the yearly average. 50,000 people evacuated from their homes, 137,000 on evacuation alert, and 6 forest fire fighters died, right? It was awful, awful summer. Tells us that despite what we're hearing from some folks in the political debate, that there is a climate crisis. This is happening at this stage because we're having these terrible fire seasons because of climate change. The worst seasons we've had are 2023, 2018, 2017, 2021. So it's not a blip. It's a clear trend, and it's happening sooner than expert predicted, and it's going to become the norm. So this is a big deal for BC politicians. A lot of the discussion is about mitigating fires, about improving forest management, about improving, and I think there's actually an announcement that came out just seconds before we went on the air about some of the steps the government is taking based on advice from an expert task force on this. But the broader trend that's interesting for BC is, in addition to all that, the world is changing because of climate change. And looking south of the border, the government putting trillions of dollars into clean tech. They're making big moves there. And the question for BC now is, as we're doing the protection, we're doing the mitigation, how do we play in a clean tech world? What's our role in a clean tech world? And so, governments have been timid, I think, up till now. And, we've seen that $1 billion battery plant. That was good. But there's big decisions government needs to make on sustainable forestry, on critical minerals, and on building out electricity as we look forward to the future, and how we're going to become resilient in the face of, the climate crisis that we're at, and how the world is changing to address it.
Mm-hmm. Jillian, it did really seem to focus the issue of climate change. And we heard the Premier cite the fires and the evacuations and the homes lost and all the numbers Jeff just shared when he was defending the carbon tax or the Clean BC climate plan or heat pumps or growing electricity or, it was his first wildfire season, and it seemed to have an impact on the climate debate and also kind of the way the Premier kept mentioning it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it wasn't just BC that saw one of our worst years of extreme weathers. It was kind of like for most of the year, the international news was also dominated by the climate crisis, whether it was, storms or floods all around the world. Right now, the COP conference, which is the World Global Climate Summit, is wrapping up. big debate there about, the language that countries are going to use when it comes to phasing out fossil fuels. When are they going to put a hard stop on that? Is it going to be more of a slow transition? Because in addition to all of the things that Jeff talked about, the government is still investing in fracking and natural gas and the development of fossil fuels. So I think that's going to continue to be a big debate here in BC. And then, of course, potential changes at the federal landscape, where we've had the federal Conservative leader who's leading in the polls call for the end of the carbon tax. We saw Kevin Falcon call for the scrapping of the Clean BC plan. So I think, definitely this story isn't going away. And I think the heat is going to be turned up on it, as we get into these stickier parts of these debates next year.
Mm-hmm. Allie, what do you think of the wildfire season as a major topic this year?
No doubt it absolutely dominated our conversation during the summer. Both Jillian and Jeff make really good points. The only thing I'll add to the conversation is that I don't think we give enough credit to Minister Bowen-Ma at the time, where she, while pregnant, very pregnant, led the information and was in these communities at the time as well. And so props to her for a successful year of really leading in her government.
Okay, Allie, stick with you. What is your pick for major topic/story of 2023?
I think we all get very reflective around this time of the year. And for me, in my consideration for the biggest news story, it was really the legacy of culture in Victoria. And at the beginning of the year, Melanie Mark really blew up that conversation in some of the best ways possible. If you don't recall, at the beginning, she made a loud statement in calling the provincial legislature a torture chamber, which led to conversations about how we treat people of diverse backgrounds and women in the legislature. And then we've even recently seen stories from other MLAs for getting called out for posting fun photos of them rather than what people potentially want to see, and just boring ledge stuff. And so anyways, it's constantly a conversation, but I think Mark had one of the biggest impacts to this this issue. Her ripple effect was even so broad or so impactful in that on her way out, in a very smart move, she said that she would be replaced by another Indigenous matriarch, and she followed up with that because then MLA Joan Phillip was then elected in the by-election, and so then we have this continuation of something so powerful of these two first Indigenous women in cabinet, right? And so I thought that was one of our biggest things. But then, despite how huge that was, I was disappointed in David Eby and how he responded to it. Something so big, you would want it to be within the office of the premier, where you can make changes, substantial ones, and really have the power to do so. Rather, he punted it to the speaker's office. They created a working group. I will give them that. It's made up of some MLAs from different parties. And in February, actually, we will see the findings of that. And so when I think about something that happened in 2023, we're going to see that in the new year, quite early on, and then we'll see what they say. And I think the conversation continues to go from there. But despite how big it was, it's interesting to me that it didn't fall within the Premier's office. So we'll see where this goes.
We did have a long show on this issue earlier in the year, and you're right, Allie. We said it has to be led by the leaders. The leaders have to get in a room and set the tone on this, and none of them did. And it went to the Speaker's office, and recommendations on decreasing toxicity in politics in February, the session before the election, is probably not great timing to actually execute any of that. But Jeff, it was a huge event in February when this happened, and then, as Allie points out, not much of a follow-up. What do we make of that?
Well, what we make of it, I think, is that we have an awful lot of work to do to make our legislature a place where the people and voices that we need want to be and feel safe to be there. And Allie spoke really well to the dynamics that you face if you're the everyday legislator's got to put up with a lot of garbage do that job. And if you're a woman, and if you're a person who's Indigenous, it's even worse. And so I'll be looking to this committee to come with some good recommendations. I'll be looking to the Premier to take those recommendations and to show leadership on them, and move the conversation forward in a good way, because like the solidarity that knits citizens together, even when we have differences, is fraying. We become so cocooned and so set apart from one another, so disconnected because of technology, and COVID accelerated all this. We think nothing of doing the worst kinds of things to each other and saying the worst kinds of things about each other. So I'll be looking to the Premier to show leadership on those recommendations, and for all the parties to treat them seriously and get behind them, so we can keep people like Melanie Mark in our legislature and bring more of them, because it's a better place when they're there.
Jillian, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with what Allie said. Green leader Sonia Furstenau actually asked the other leaders to join her on that working group, and they declined, but she's still on there. So we do have a leader, and the only female leader, and I think that's a good thing. And it's going to be really interesting to see what these legislators come up with, because like we talked about on our previous shows on this issue, we also talked about it a bit when Katrina Chen left a couple of weeks ago, or announced that she's not running again. These are much bigger global trends where we see a real kind of disintegration and polarization in our political rhetoric that's reflected in how hard it is to be a politician these days, especially if you're a woman or someone from a diverse background. So nobody knows how challenging it is, as well as the people doing those jobs. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they come up with.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully something. There's lots of ideas out there. They require political will, and they require, I think, people to lose some of what they perceive to be as an advantage in the way that system is set up for them, for whatever reason, for the betterment of everybody else. So good selection there. I will jump in with my pick for story of the year, and I'm going to go with the BC Conservatives. Their meteoric rise in popularity, according to pretty much every polling firm this year, started in the teens in approval, in third, fourth place. John Rustad became leader in March. The Abbotsford MLA Bruce Banman defects from the United to Conservatives in September. They get official party status at the legislature. They start throwing questionable questions in the House on some of them. I think their book banning stuff was kind of ridiculous, but then some of their other questions, clearly there's a constituency for them in the province, and they're the only party asking them, and it ends with them in the high 20s leapfrogging BC United for second place. So it's fascinating to me in that it potentially represents a shift in the political landscape, although critics say it might be kind of artificial with that confusion of the federal Conservatives. We're watching this idea of whether there is a movement here. Is there a disenfranchised group of people who are going to actually vote in the election and rally behind some of the numbers we're seeing and change the landscape? I don't know. I think it's a kind of fascinating shift during the year. Allie, what do you think of the Conservative impact this year?
The primary focus of both the center-right opposition parties is really in 2024 for the election, who's going to be the better opposition. So it really won't come down to so much the polls, but it'll come down to election readiness. And for when people start paying attention to, well, let's get down to voting and who am I going to do it? Who am I going to vote for? Who's going to be the most effective in opposition? Because, well, the polls aren't looking great that either one of them are going to become government. And isn't that the biggest problem? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that is a much larger discussion about the split that leads to the New Democrat supermajority and all of that. Jeff, what do you think?
Have you ever been to Iceland, Rob?
No, I have not.
Well, Icelanders have amazing holiday traditions. One you'd be interested in is Christmas Cat, who prowls around.
I support Christmas cats.
It prowls on Christmas Eve, and if an Icelander's not wearing a new piece of clothing and Christmas Cat finds them, Christmas Cat will eat you. That's true. They have
Okay.
They're on an island in the North Atlantic. But they also have the Yule lads. The Yule lads. These are the Santa Clauses. Kids put their shoe on a sill in the 13 days before Christmas, and if they're good, they get candy, and if they're bad, they get rotten potato. The only reason that John Rustad is doing so well in the polls right now is because Kevin Falcon's put his shoe on a sill, and voters have filled it full of spoiled spuds, right? It's been a tough year for Kevin Falcon. 17% in the polls, half of what Andrew Wilkinson got in the worst election result ever for the BC Liberals. And it's just winds in the sail to John Rustad, who's had a very clear message, good political communications, riding the winds of Poilievre federally in a way that BC United has not. The rebrand has been really difficult. And they've just failed. He's just failed to connect with people on the issues that they care about, which is really surprising given how much of a rough time folks are for having. So it'll be an interesting dynamic to see how it plays out in 2024, but definitely a big story in 2023.
Still time for United to rally. I mean, it's still possible. 10 months is a long time in politics. Jillian, what do you think of the conservative topic of 2023?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it a lot. It's been certainly interesting to discuss and to watch as it evolves. I was going back because we've been talking a lot about this being, brand confusion with the federal Conservatives. And I was reminded that the Conservatives started to see a little bit of a breakthrough starting in 2020, coming out of some of the discontent with some of the government's COVID policies. They actually got about a third of the vote in Peace River South and Peace River North, and some growth in a lot of other ridings as well. I think they're only able to field about a dozen candidates because of the snap election, but just reminded me that we've sort of been seeing the seeds of this for a while, and that I do think that there are some solid and very real underlying trends that are driving it, that are going to be hard even if Falcon kind of gets his act together, figures out his brand, and manages to communicate it effectively. I think that the right is still going to be facing a split heading into the election next year.
Yeah, and second place in the Langford by-election for the BC Conservatives as well, which was a manifestation of actual voters behind these polling numbers. So very interesting, a fascinating year. I mean, next year is going to be even more fascinating as we head into a provincial election. But thank you, panel, for breaking everything down. Thank you for watching. Make sure you subscribe for all the latest in BC politics, and we'll be back next week on Political Capital.